recording is starting, and I am going to pull up the PowerPoint so that I can share it with you to this evening. I'm assuming everyone can see. If you can just nod your heads, I'll know for sure. I will start from the beginning here. So really tonight is the wrap up of looking at the joy of love, the Pope's synodal apostolic exhortation. And most people think of it or hear it more readily or easily as the joy of love. That is really what he's contemplating. As you know, Bishop Lobsinger went through the document, the beginning and then the end, and I got the middle piece. And so the document really is meant to remind us of the beauty and the importance of love. And it's not unrealistic, as we heard the bishop say in the last two sessions. The Pope went to the people. I think I mentioned in an earlier session that we had over 1,500 people respond to the Synod questions in detail and with quite a bit of passion. We sent all of that to Rome, and all of those were considered as we sent our response to the CCCB, and they sent their response to Rome. And so the document structure, which we haven't really looked at, it's really actually fairly short. It's an easy read, but the depth of the read is so very important. So as you know, Bishop Lobsinger looked at 3 chapters. The first night, 4 chapters the second night, and I got the 2 in the middle. And the whole document itself, an apostolic exhortation, as Bishop Lobsinger mentioned, it's a message to us, a letter to us. It's a way of teaching, it's a way of encouraging us. And Pope Francis wanted it to be a living document that we looked at and said, yes, here's what we need to do, this, this, and this, which is what we're hoping. So the audience is the whole church. It's not just a couple of us, it's not just bishops, it's not just people who work in ministry, but it's the whole church, and really in many ways also a message to the world on what love is. And so the Pope looks at this as these laws of love and tenderness. The law of love and tenderness, mercy and forgiveness, tender and mercy, and tender and intimacy. These are the 3 things he sees as the overarching to his whole document. He starts the document off, as you will remember, talking about the issues, what we know about families, the issues in families today, what he heard, what people wrote about, what we know from social science. Then he talks about what is love, knowing all of that then, which we're going to talk about tonight in 4 and 5, and then goes on to sort of break apart various pieces about how we deal with those things and how we make it, if you will, better for people. So the document really is written, for all of us. And right from the start, he brings these 3 concepts to the forefront. And in a sense, I would say foreshadowing what we're going to see as we read through the document, through the rest of it. And so he wants us to know that the law of love is self-giving love. And that's what he's going to talk about in chapter 4 tonight as we go through that, that mercy and forgiveness always should and does flow from love. And so he's wanting us to remember that. He talks about forgiveness again tonight in chapter 4. And then this tender intimacy that we see in Hebrew scripture, and that God's relationship with us is like a tender parental love, and it speaks of a nursing mother. So he talks about those Psalms that we see, Psalm 131, and is trying to get us to reflect on that sense. So as you know, Bishop Lobsinger covered in quite some detail this state of the family and where we're at in the world today. Some is good and some is not so good, and the challenges of that is putting forward to people. And in chapter 2, he explored that in quite some detail, as I say, Bishop Lobsinger did for us. And we heard in Bishop Lobsinger's pieces this concept of the ideal and then real life and what that means. And so our faith tradition, the Catholic tradition, our teachings, when we read the Bible, we see the ideal laid out for us. And the obligation of the church and of all of those within it is not only to try to know the ideal, but to try to help ourselves and others live the ideal. But the Pope's reminding us that there's a gap. The reality of the human existence, the reality of human relationships, all of those things cause real life to often, and maybe more often than not be actually the ideal that we strive for. But his message to us is that we shouldn't give up on the ideal, that there are ways to move towards the ideal, if not slowly. And the obligation of the church and those within it are to help both ourselves and others, if you will, to be able to live that. So I wanted to start off before we get into chapter 4, looking and just a little reminder of what those ideals are. So the church teaches us, of course, that's lifelong sacramental marriage, which shouldn't be delayed or avoided because of selfishness or things that we want. We understand, as we heard in the parts that Bishop Lobsinger gave last week, that there are challenges to this, and the church has to and does respond. But we know that this is the teaching, that ultimately, ideally, when we marry, we want it to last forever. And I think that's probably true of us just as humans, whether we are faithful or not. We hope that the marriages will last forever. And in a sacramental marriage, that ideal is upfront and part of our commitment to marriage. And then there's an openness to life within the family, however it may come. We'll talk a little bit more about that in chapter 5, so I won't go into that too much. That children are raised by a loving husband and wife, caring, seeing their needs, putting their needs up front. And then this concept of no domination or violence should ever happen within any relationship, and that is not acceptable in a sense to the church. And then the concept of social justice that supports families, it doesn't hurt families. And those of you who took the Fratelli Tutti series last year with me, you'll remember that there's a lot about this global sense of a need for justice for all, that all should have the right to live. So those are, in a nutshell, our ideals that we're working towards in marriage, and the Pope is asking us for. And how should we respond in those ways to those that we're supporting, to our own selves as we're trying to live the ideal? Well, the Pope lays it out for us. We have to be humble and realistic. We can't ignore the messiness of life, and we can't turn people off of marriage. We have to assist them and help them. We have to accompany people from where they're at towards walking towards the ideal. I always think when I read that of a young baby, all of you who have seen a young child, when they first start to stand, they can't, they just fall over, and we assist them. We hold them by the hands. We gradually hold them less. We gradually let them take 1 or 2 steps, but we don't let them fall. We hold them close to us so that they won't fall and hurt themselves, gradually letting them get better and better until eventually they walk on their own. But that walk is kind of like this. They got a hard time getting the balance going. And then we know they're getting better when the hands come down and they can actually carry something. So there's this gradualness towards walking, which then leads to a gradualness towards running. And so therefore, we have to be the same with people that we're trying to assist. So we also need to avoid judgment. We can't know all the complexities of any person's life, and that's true for all of us in every situation. And very often I know myself, when I think I know what a situation is or what someone is conveying to me, I find out something different. So avoiding judgment becomes crucial. Accompanying them becomes necessary and helpful. And then we help people to discern what is it they're being called to, how is it they're feeling, how they might want to change and live more closely to the ideals, and then advocate for the ideals, not to dismiss them, not to bang people over the head with them, but to explain why we're called to live the ideal and how that can make both our lives and ourselves better. So that brings him then into this concept of, the joy of love and marriage, and living out the Gospels, and the way that we should see love and marriage in a better and, if you will, more joyful way. And so he talks about the fact that love takes effort to communicate well, to go deeper, to act wisely on emotions. And chapter 4 really unpacks a lot of this. We're going to talk about passions a little bit later, but he talks about, the fact that passion led us here, and that we should then use that passion to be better in the relationship. and how we see the other and how we contemplate them and how we appreciate them and how we notice them, and to communicate. This, as he says, is very sometimes difficult for people. And so we have to try to help people gain the skills they need, because communication becomes essential. And so this builds us up to this point then of coming into his chapter 4, where he looks at Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4-8. And I'm going to read it out of the book for you, because I did have it marked, but now got to find the glasses. There's always something. So in the book, this is the passage he's using. And he says this: in a lyrical passage of St. Paul, we see some of the features of true love. Love is patient, love is kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. So that's the passage he's going to unpack, and we're going to look at tonight. All of us have heard that passage in various places, but in particular at weddings. And I was going to ask you tonight, but a number of things came together that I didn't get the poll questions typed in, so we're not going to necessarily see the poll question, but I was going to ask you which one of those is your favorite. We have the passage, and some are more favorable to us than others. And sometimes we say, well, isn't that a little bit unrealistic? Love is that, but can anybody live that? In a sense, the Pope says that in this chapter as well, but we are always striving towards the ideal. And I think he unpacks this reading in a beautiful way that helps us see love, whether it be marital love, although he's speaking about that mostly. He's also speaking about how we love others in our family, others in our community, others in our church community, others in our friendships. And so we're going to, as I say, look at this and unpack this this whole piece tonight a little bit. As the Pope does. It's his unpacking, really not mine. And I've stuck fairly closely to using his material because I think his material is absolutely beautiful. And I wanted you to hear much of what he has to say. So we're looking at this reading that is, as I say, most often we see in weddings. And so it starts off, of course, with love is patient. And what does that mean? Well, the Pope explains that in the Old Testament, we see a God that is slow to anger. And it's a quality that we should have so that we don't act on impulse and therefore avoid offending others, because anger often comes out of another place. When we act on anger, we can hurt people unintentionally, and it actually doesn't serve our purpose very well. So being patient, he says, is about being mistreated or being mistreated or tolerating physical aggression or allowing ourselves to be used. It's not those things. No, we cannot, though, expect people to be perfect. So he says, when we do, everything makes us impatient. So this need for perfection makes us impatient at the humanness of the other person. So we need this piece of love for every relationship, he says, this patience, this understanding, a loving compassion that allows us to accept all others in the world. This is the challenge of real love. And I think in many ways it is, because we often are intolerant of the other, even though that is who they are. So the first one of patience becomes sort of an essential link, if you will, to the rest of it. So then he goes on to talk about this need for patience and explain that patience is not a passive attitude, which we can sometimes think, okay, we're just going to sit back, but it is actually accompanied by activity, by creative interactions with others. How do we find that patience? How do we live that patience? Because love then, when we do find that patience, he says, benefits and helps others. For this reason, he says, love must be kind, as you saw. So love is patient, love is kind, because it's essential to each person. And from that understanding of being patient with the person, accepting them for their, if you will, realness and who they are, we move on, and he moves on to this fact that love is not jealous and love is not boastful. These are two really challenging pieces for us. The Pope talks about, unpacking the beautiful reading of St. Paul and how he moves through this concept of love not being jealous. And he says that there's no room, St. Paul, for discomfort at another person's good fortune. And so we always have to be checking ourselves. Envy shows that we're not concerned for the other's happiness, he writes. And this is a quote from the document number 95. True love values the other person's achievement. It does not see him or her as a threat. It frees us from the sour taste of envy. It recognizes that everyone has different gifts and a unique path in life. So it strives to discover its own road to happiness while allowing others to find theirs. There's a constant sort of message when you read. The Pope is telling us how we help and love another, but also ourselves. So it frees us, as he's saying here, to our own self to be able to become who we're meant to be as well. And it reminds us that the last two commandments speak to this. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, and you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. And so he's reminding us that this coveting, this neighbor of neighbor, or anyone, your neighbor's wife or anyone else, is a form of jealousy and envy that only serves not only to go against the commandments, but to hurt us deeply. And so love, he says, is not boastful. When someone has the need to be haughty and somewhat pushy, it doesn't serve them well. And I quote him, I'll say, he says this: those who love not only refrain from speaking too much about themselves, but are focused on others. They do not need to be the center of attention. And then he goes on to explain further in Paul's words that Paul goes on to say we should not become too puffed up. And the Pope writes, it also points to something more subtle, an obsession with showing off and a loss of sense of reality. Such people think that because they are more spiritual or wise, in quotes, what really makes us important is a love that understands, shows concerns, and embraces the world. So sometimes when we are being boastful, we are actually not loving at all. We are actually putting people down and not allowing them to be who they're meant to be. And then he provides this little lesson on what this looks like. And he says this: it's important for Christians to show their love by the way they treat family members who are less knowledgeable about the faith, weak or less sure in their convictions. At times, the opposite occurs. Say supposedly mature believers within the family become unbearable, arrogant. Love, on the other hand, is marked by humility. If we are to understand, forgive, and serve others from the heart, our pride has to be healed and our humility must increase. Jesus told his disciples that in a world where power prevails, each tries to dominate the other, but it shall not be so among you. So there's a message to us to check ourselves, to see, is this the way we are? Is this the way we have maybe done things, or is the way we are without realizing it? And to back off from that. And that goes back to that ideal versus reality. Yes, there's an ideal, but where is the person, and how do I help them walk gently towards what it is they're called to? So love is not jealous nor boastful. Those are both harmful to love and harmful to the people we say that we love. And so then he moves on to this piece about being rude, that love is not rude. And in essence, he's speaking to us about the importance of how we speak to others, of how we engage with others, of making sure that we are being caring, that we are understanding all people, that our words matter and how we treat others matter, and that no one is above the other, and that we I'm sorry, the dog is just, and that we have to contemplate how it is that we are engaging with others in that light. So I just want to I'm going to just stop my screen share for a moment. And we don't have a lot of time to unpack everything, and I've got a fair amount to do, but I've covered some fairly important pieces on love from the Pope's perspective, what it is and what it is not. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes I'm going to send you into breakout rooms for literally 5 minutes just to talk amongst yourselves. When we come back, we're not going to have an opportunity to share with the larger group because it takes too long. But I'm going to put you into breakout rooms now. And let's see, we'll put maybe 5 in a group. We'll see how we end up here with my group's numbers. You'll have 3, 4, maybe 5 in your group. It will send you automatically, and it will also tell you when you have less than a minute and when you're going to be coming back to me. So you can chat amongst yourself and then you'll come back, okay? So I'm sending you to them now, and you will automatically be sent to your rooms. You might have to click when it comes up about going to your room. Just click on it when it comes up, okay? So I'll see you in a few minutes. Nadia, you didn't get sent to a room, so I'm not sure if you didn't click or if you decided not to go to the room. If you don't want to go to a room, that's fine. You can just wait till they come back, okay? Oh, somebody else is there too. Okay. Okay, so we're back to recording. So we're going to continue on. I'm going to pull my PowerPoint up again. If I can find the right one. There we go. Share with you. All right, so we'll move on to the next one, which is generosity. And in this concept, in the Paul's hymn, as the Pope is calling it throughout, he states that love does not seek its own interest, nor seek what is its own. So the Bible makes it clear in many places that generosity and serving others is far more noble than loving ourselves. And the Pope says loving ourselves is only important as a psychological prerequisite for being able to love others. But it's an important point he's making, that we have to love ourselves and we have to learn to love ourselves. And if we don't love ourselves, we have to find ways or seek help to do that, because we can only truly love another when we love ourselves. So he reminds us, Pope Francis, that real love demands nothing in return, and that the greatest love shown to us by Jesus himself is to lay down one's life for another. And we know that God did that. But he's really trying to get us to contemplate that we can figuratively, we can in family and for others, lay down our lives. And in essence, we would say priests and religious lay down their lives for others, for us. And so there's ways as we're living, not necessarily die on a cross as Christ did, but to allow us to lay down our lives for others, to be what the other needs and what the other will benefit from. And real love does that. It is generous, and generous in a sense beyond our own needs and looking always at the other's needs. So then he looks at love is not irritable or resentful. And these are two that the Pope spends, a fair amount of time on, I think. And he is always explaining at the beginning of these what the words that Paul used, in the writing that he would have used, the words, how they have different meanings than we may contemplate in our English language, if you will. And so he's looking at this one in terms of irritability and resentfulness, and relates it to this sort of interior response that we can sometimes have to something that's happening exteriorly. So irritability is a response to something that's generally happening outside of ourselves, by something that's happening around us or what people are saying. And Pope Francis both explains and tells us how we should act in paragraph 103. And he says this, that irritability, it refers to a violent reaction within, a hidden irritation that sets us on edge where others are concerned. And if they were troublesome or threatening, and thus to be as if they were troublesome or threatening, and thus to be avoided. To nurture such interior hostility helps no one. It only causes hurt and alienation. Indignation is only healthy when it makes us react to a grave injustice. When it permeates our attitude towards others, it is harmful. And so he goes on to say, and he always again explains the situation where the issue is, and then gives us, in a sense, a way out of it. My advice is never to let the day end without making peace in the family. And quotes, and how am I going to make peace? By getting down on my knees? No, just by small gestures, a little something, and harmony within your family will be restored. Just a little caress, no words are necessary, but do not let the day end without making peace in your family. And although he's not a therapist, I can tell you that almost every therapist would tell you he's absolutely on the right track, that we have to end our days. We might not even resolve the issue, but we will get past the sense of being irritable and resentful towards the person, because that doesn't help any relationship at all. And so again, he's defining it as our interior response, and that we must rise above that and find out, in a sense, why we have that reaction, so that we can love as we're called to love. And then love forgives. Forgiveness, we know throughout all of our teachings, throughout the Bible, throughout all of what Christ said when he was here, is a major part of our faith teachings. And Pope Francis explains to us that it's rooted really in a positive attitude that seeks to understand the other's weakness and to excuse them, to understand there is a human condition, that no one is perfect. And so that all of us are going to need forgiveness at some point. And in forgiving, we create these better relationships. Forgiveness, he says, it's taught to us in the Our Father, and he quotes it spoken by Christ when he dies on the cross, forgive them for they know not what they are doing. A reminder to us that even in that moment, when people were putting him to death, Christ was saying, forgive them. He understood their weakness. He understood they didn't really know what they were doing. They weren't necessarily intending to kill God, because at that point, most of them didn't believe it was God. And he was understanding of that, not going to want them to be punished in a sense for that, but he wanted those that he left behind to help them move towards learning about who he was. And Pope Francis says this: yet we keep looking for more and more faults, often imagining greater evils, presuming all kinds of bad intentions, and so resentment grows and deepens. He reminds us that if we act and think this way, every mistake becomes a problem, and we don't leave room for human error that occurs in all of us. Forgiveness, he says, is necessary, even though not always easy. And I think he says something quite beautiful on this passage. And I'll say again, proven in research. And so I think it has a lot of credence and something for all of us to ponder around this area of forgiveness. And he says this: today we recognize that being able to forgive others implies the liberating experience of understanding and forgiving ourselves. Often our mistakes or criticism we have received from loved ones can lead to a loss of self-esteem. We become distant from others, avoid affection, and fearful in our interpersonal relationships. Blaming others becomes falsely reassuring. We have to learn to pray over our past history, to accept ourselves, to learn how to live with our limitations, and even to forgive ourselves in order to have the same attitude towards others. Again, a reminder to us of our own need to be healthy, to be able to love fully. And ultimately, he says, this forgiveness comes from understanding of God's unconditional love and forgiveness, knowing that we both love and forgive others, allows us to be understanding, supportive, and encouraging of them. So unconditional love connects to forgiveness, because if we have unconditional love, we'll understand the human person will not be perfect before us. And so we will expect to be forgiving towards them. And that means that we can continue to love, we continue to understand. And in fact, I think we help people grow when we forgive. Love rejoices with other. This is an important point, that we're all called to rejoice, that we're called to rejoice in the right way. And the Pope says it like this. In other words, we rejoice, just letting somebody in. We rejoice at the good of others when we see their dignity and value their abilities and good works. This is impossible for those who must always be comparing and competing, even with their spouse, so that they secretly rejoice in their failures. We all know, and maybe some of us here at times have rejoiced in other failures. And the Pope is saying that is not the kind of love we're called to by God, that rejoicing in others' failures is in effect a failure within ourselves. So the Pope reminds us, if we fail to learn how to rejoice in the well-being of others and focus primarily on our own needs, we condemn ourselves to a joyless existence. For, as Jesus said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. The family, he says, must be a place where we rejoice in what others have accomplished and celebrate their abilities. So it's a beautiful statement. When we give, we receive, and that is very true. And so he's reminding us that we should rejoice in others. We should give to others. We should compliment others. We should rejoice in their abilities, because only as a whole do we actually function in the ways that are best for all of us and for each other. And I'm not sure if you can see the top of the slide. It'll depend on your screen. I've got the piece going across here for love, mute, all those kinds of things. But it says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. In essence, as you see there, love never fails. Paul ends with these 4 phrases in this chapter of Corinthians. And in it, Pope Francis says, those 4 statements clearly give us the countercultural power of love that is able to face whatever might threaten it. All things, loves, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love doesn't have moments when it says no and yes, but it is always in existence. And Pope Francis says that these 4 are not to be taken lightly. These are not just thrown in there into one sentence, that they are important. And he kind of breaks them down in the document. So love bears all things has to do with the use of the tongue. He says that the verb can mean, in a sense, holding one's peace, so bearing it about what may be wrong with another person. We don't have to tell people everything that's wrong. Very often they already know. Sometimes we do it to help, but he says it implies limiting judgment, checking the impulse to issue a firm and ruthless condemnation. He tells us we are called to hold our tongue by God and to truly love. It becomes essential in all relationships, but sometimes it's better to bear all things. So he talks about the choices we make when we see weaknesses and imperfections in others that we love, but we can choose to look beyond them to the total person that's in front of us. And all of us, rightfully, he says, I love this line, are a mixture of light and shadow. None of us don't have some imperfections. Often we don't see them as readily ourselves in ourselves, but they're there. And so because each of us have light and shadow, we can choose to look to the light and not to the shadow when we're dealing with other people. And then he looks at love believes all things. He says the following, here belief is not to be taken in its strict theological meaning, but more in the sense of what we mean by trust. This goes beyond simply presuming that the other is not lying or cheating. He quotes this, love trusts, it sets free, does not try to control, possess, or dominate everything. This freedom, which fosters independence, an openness to the world around us and to new experiences, can only enrich and expand relationships. In fact, we know by research that people, children, friends, spouses, often live up to the expectations we provide for them verbally and sometimes unconsciously. And so if we trust, if we believe all things, the person is better. They do better. They live up to that expectation. And so when we believe all things, there's a sense of trust and hope in the relationship. And even if trust is broken, we need to work towards inventing, if you will, not reinventing, but being able to take that trust within ourselves again, to reincorporate it into our relationship and to trust again, because without trust, love can't endure. And then he looks at love hopes all things. And it's a beautiful piece around hope in general, I think, not just in relationship, but he talks about the fact that love doesn't despair of the future. Following upon what was just said, and he's talking about what he's just written, this phrase speaks of the hope of one who knows that others can change, mature, and radiate unexpected beauty and untold potential. It's a beautiful light gift he's giving in that statement, that hope says you can change, you can do better, you will try not to repeat whatever the situation was that has caused angst between you. And he goes on to say, God may well make crooked lines straight and draw some good from the evil we endure in this world. I think that's beautiful in a world that often asks, why is evil even here? God doesn't prevent all things. The world is a living and breathing entity. But as he says there, God intervenes. He can try to make crooked lines into something that is still good. And then he goes on to beautifully remind us about this piece, that our imperfections will be righted in heaven. And real hope, when we contain real hope, inner hope. It allows us to see the good, to see, in a sense, he uses the term, the person from a supernatural perspective. Is that easy? I say no. Is it beautiful? I say yes. And so when we look at the other, do we see the perfection that is within them that they will one day have? And do we help them, as I said earlier, move towards that ideal living, to be a better person in their lives, as challenging as it is, and can be? And then the last piece of this 4 statements that he unpacks is love endures all things. Of this, Pope Francis says, this means that love bears every trial with a positive attitude. It stands firm in hostile surroundings. This endurance involves not only the ability to tolerate certain aggravations, but something greater, a constant readiness to confront any challenge. It is a love that never gives up, even in the darkest hour. And he quotes here in the document Martin Luther King in quite a long verse. It's quite a bit longer than the one I'm going to give you, but it's a very good piece. And so I wanted to take a portion of the quote that he uses. And Martin Luther King said this: "And when you come to the point that you look in the face of every man and see deep down within him what religion calls the image of God, you begin to love him in spite of everything. No matter what he does, you see God's image." So important for us. Do we see the image of God in every person? Those that we disagree with, those that are on the street begging, those that are maybe uppity and haughty, those that irritate us. This seeing the image of God in every human becomes a foundation on how we learn to love all people in all circumstances. And so the Pope goes on to sort of include this message about, again, putting our love into action. And he says this: love does not yield to resentment, scorn for others, or the desire to hurt or to gain some advantage. The Christian ideal, especially in families, is a love that never gives up. So again, he's telling us about the document, about the reading, about the words in the reading, but he's always implying that we have something to do with this. That's why he calls this a living document, a document that we need to take out to others. And so the Pope now goes on to tell us that with a clear understanding of what love really is, he's been unpacking it all the way along here with the love is patient, love is kind. He then says, only now can we go on to discuss conjugal love, because we have to really understand love from the perspective of every human being and how we're all called to love. And now he's moving into married love. And he says this is a love between a husband and wife, a love sanctified, enriched, and illuminated by the grace of the sacrament of marriage. It is an effective union, spiritual and sacrificial, which combines the warmth of friendship and erotic passion and endures long after emotions and passions subsides. It is the love that, Pope Francis says, this powerful love is a reflection of the unbroken covenant between Christ and humanity that culminated in his self-sacrifice on the cross. It's a pretty deep concept to grasp and to understand and to live, that our love is called to be deeper, is called to be Christ-like, and that it is a love that endures throughout a marriage history. Last week, it might have been last week, somebody asked a question, and I was thinking, I think they asked the question about love and marriage, and Bishop Lobsinger was talking about, the different stages of loving in marriage. And we have a beautiful poem that we give out at marriage preparation. And it's about the different stages of marriage. It's called Becoming Married. And in essence, it goes through every part of marriage: newly married, with children, with teenagers, empty nesters, in old age and maybe illness. And then as a spouse when one has passed on, that we are always becoming married. And that's in a way what he's saying here. The passions of our marriage, of our love, may ebb and flow and change, but the depth of that love is always there. The passion for the other person is always there. He goes on from the last quote I gave of his to remind us of this. God is also a communion, the three persons of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, who live eternally in perfect unity. And this is precisely the mystery of marriage. God makes of the two spouses one single existence. This is concrete daily consequences because the spouses, in virtue of the sacrament, are invested with a true and proper mission, so that starting with the simple, ordinary things of life, they can make visible the love with which Christ loves his church and continues to give his life for her. It's a big task we're given, those of us that are married. And I don't know about all of you, but some days I think I'm up to the task, and I hope I'm reflecting that. And other times I think, maybe not doing so good, when I'm tired, when I'm impatient, when I've got too much on my plate. And so the Pope is reminding us that we have a task in marriage, and that we should always be looking at our love as the giving love that he talks about through the Corinthians reading, but also now in light of our reflecting the Trinity to the world. So he goes on to talk about love, the joy of marriage, the importance of marriage, and this whole conjugal piece relates to all of this. He talks about marriage being the greatest form of friendship. It has a caring, self-giving, and an intimacy deeper than any other friendship we will have. And he says this: it's a union possessing all the traits of a good friendship: concern for the good of the other, reciprocity, intimacy, warmth, stability, and the resemblance born of a shared life. Marriage joins to all this an indissoluble exclusivity expressed in the stable commitment to share and shape together the whole of life. It's really a beautiful quote, reminding us, and I think sometimes couples forget this, that really in marriage we're friends, and that friendship is deep and committed and life lasting. And so it's a lifelong commitment, which is his next point. And he says that it's only natural as lovers and newlyweds express their love and commitment to last forever. It's about belonging completely to the other. And that is the position of the church, that it's meant to be that way because it reflects God's love for us that never dies. And from that, then, this greatest friendship, this most intimate friendship that we'll share with a lifelong commitment. And by the way, the research tells us that commitment is a very important part to satisfaction in any relationship, in particular a married relationship. When we trust that the other is committed, we feel more secure, we can be more realistic about who we are, and we can have that sense of love that won't end, all of what the Pope has been talking about. So those things, he says, leads to a passionate union. Sexuality brings a couple closer together, and we know that on every level, on every front. And he says this: marriage is likewise a friendship marked by passion, but a passion always directed to an ever more stable and intense union. This is because marriage was not instituted solely for the procreation of children, but also that mutual love might be properly expressed, that it should grow and mature. So again, in a world that has begun to see sex on a different level than we see it as an intimate union, part of the greater piece of our relationships, and not the sole piece or the only piece. And that becomes important because passion in a marriage is about wanting to be with the other, is about sharing with the other, is about cooking with the other and doing things with the other. It isn't just about a sexual union. It's about encompassing all of who we are, which is really what the term sexuality is about, the entirety of who we are. And so he reminds us that in marriage, the joy of love needs to be cultivated. When the search for pleasure becomes obsessive, It holds us in thrall and keeps us from experiencing other satisfactions. Joy, on the other hand, increases our pleasure and helps us to find fulfillment in any number of things, even at those times of life when physical pleasure has ebbed. And a lesson for all of us again, which he does give continually throughout the document. He says this: the ascetic experience of love is expressed in that gaze which contemplates other persons as ends in themselves, even if they are infirm, elderly, or physically unattractive. Love opens our eyes and enables us to see, beyond all else, the great worth of the human being. It's a beautiful piece. When I was teaching marriage prep, I regularly told the young people that the one thing I value most intensely about my married relationship with my husband is that in all of our years of marriage, which are continuing to be more and more, I have never seen him look at another woman. I'm not suggesting he may not have glanced at someone who's good looking or any of those things. That would not bother me that he has, but he has never done it so that I feel impacted by that I feel, is that person more important than I am? Always I have felt his gaze, as the Pope says here, for me. And that has meant so much to me over our years of marriage. And I think it's imperative that we think about that in our own relationships, even sometimes with helping our children see that as they get older and as they get into relationship, that this is respect for the other, not commenting on other people, not saying, whoa, my father-in-law used to have a statement that he made when he saw someone that was very good looking. And I'm not even going to tell you what the statement was, but I used to always think, I wonder how it made my mother-in-law feel. He didn't mean it in any way. He completely loved my mother-in-law, but it was an indication that this person was somebody he wouldn't mind being with. And so we have to be cautious of all of that, which is what the Pope is saying. True love sees the other, cares about the other, and always puts them first and loves them first. He goes on to say it's not about perfection, that we can't expect that a spouse can give what only God can give. God is divine. None of us are. We're human. So we will have imperfections. We won't be perfect all the time. And we may slip up even in the gaze. But important that all the other pieces that we've talked about tonight come into play so that we accept that a person may slip up. It doesn't define who they are, but that is there. And then this sense of our love ultimately being outward facing, that a family shares life with others by caring with hospitality and mercy. And so the passions, in a sense, in the family have to be shared with others. And he goes on in fairly description to give us what I'm now calling Pope Francis's prescription for love. Although he did say it always says, please, thank you, is also one, and I'm sorry are three important words. But he talks about these things, that we need to talk things over. The dialogue has to be open and ongoing, that we can't let things build up with inside of us, that we must embrace leisurely, do things together quietly, take some time to connect with each other. Don't always be on the run or be quick. Share plans and beliefs and future feelings. Listen to one another. And listening, we're not good at. The experts say we're very bad at listening. Throughout this talk, because I'm on Zoom and because I'm talking for a long time, you will have drifted off or thought about a response that you would like to make. Often that's just what happens. So he's saying listen to another means that I can repeat back what you said and I can tell you the feelings that went with it. Very important. Be attentive to each other's moods and presence. Don't bring up the thing you want to discuss or share plans that are different when you know that the person is tired or has had a difficult day, those kinds of things. Appreciate one another, a simple thing, but here's where saying please and thank you and acknowledging what people do and being having a sense of gratitude for all really can make a difference. That's the kind of gaze he was talking about earlier. It's a gaze that's beyond just the physical and into the deep and personal. actively build a stronger relationship. I often say in marriage enrichment, we spend a lot of time keeping our car in order by taking it for oil changes, tire changes, this and that. We don't actively do things for our marriage sometimes. And then share moments of meaningful silence, looking out at a beautiful sunset together, just sitting holding hands, being at church together. And all of these things sort of are a prescription, he says, to build love in that relationship, and all good advice. So I wanted to include it for you. Then from there, he moves into this concept of the pleasure, passion, and sex, which is part of passions. And as you see on the screen, he talks about it being essential elements. So the Second Vatican Council, this is from the document, teaches that this conjugal love embraces the good of the whole person. It can enrich the sediments of the spirit and their physical expression with a unique dignity and ennoble them as a special features and manifestation of the friendship proper to the marriage. So it puts a friendship into an intimate situation beyond what we share with others or ever should share with others. And that's what makes it special and important to the married relationship. He goes on to say desires, feelings, emotions, what the ancients call the passions. So it's not just physical, it's desires, feelings, emotions, all have an important place in married life. They are awakened whenever another becomes present and part of a person's life. It is characteristics of all living beings to reach out to other things, and this tendency always has basic affective signs: pleasure or pain, joy or sadness, tenderness or fear. They ground the most elementary psychological activity. Human beings live on this earth, and all that they do and seek is fraught with passion. So these then are the essential elements of married love. Without these, it's insufficient to marry the love of God. We really have to feel deeply and passionately for the other. The church is not against enjoyment. God loves it when we experience joy. Sex is a gift from God. We know that and we see that. However, we do need, the Pope says, to set healthy limits to keep sex from being distorted or misused or the only element of a relationship. So sex should never be a form of, if you will, domination. When it's disconnected from a loving relationship, it can become violent, manipulative, abusive, depersonalized, and unhealthy. The Pope says that sex is an interpersonal language that allows us to speak heart to heart. It connects us that fully. And he goes on to say that desire is good and normal, but if we use them for evil, they're wrong, even in marriage. And so we have to always be observing and looking at that and seeing where we are. And he says this in the document about erotic love. All this brings us to the sexual dimension of marriage. God himself created sexuality, which is a marvelous gift to his creatures. If this gift needs to be cultivated and directed, it is to prevent the impoverishment of an authentic value. He goes on to say that the thing to be looked down upon, and that there can be no attempt whatsoever to call into question its necessity. Sorry, that it's not a thing to be looked down upon, and that it is, we should not be calling its necessity into question. He goes on to say that it should not be seen as something to just be tolerated, but rather must be seen as a gift from God that enriches the relationship of the spouses because it draws people together. As a passion sublimated by a love respectful of the dignity of the other, it becomes a pure, unadulterated affirmation, revealing the marvels of which the human heart is capable. It's a challenging part of many marriages. There are so many elements that go in. There's differences in males and females, difference in attraction levels, difference in our way of, in a sense, even using the sexual union. For males, it's a comfort, it's a connection. Often for females, it becomes sort of a icing on the cake. They want the relationship to be more engaging, more personal before they engage in a sexual union. So the Pope is saying this is an important piece of it, that God created it for a reason. So it's important that we acknowledge, in a sense, and talk about it, and not just let it drift off, because it is meant to be within our relationships to some degree or another, on which we both agree. So on this piece, once he gets past this portion here, he goes on to talk about single people. And he finishes the chapter, in a sense, by talking about those who are unmarried, and who often dedicate their lives to others and the church. So he says this: virginity is a form of love. As a sign, it speaks to us of the coming of the kingdom and the need for complete devotion to the cause of the gospel. He talks about, Pope Francis, the fact that we should not place one form of living above another. So singlehood, vocation, married life, that virginity and marriage both matter and they both have their role. But he points out this in the piece, and that is this: the value of virginity lies in its symbolizing a love that has no need to possess the other. In this way, it reflects the freedom of the kingdom of heaven. Virginity encourages married couples to live their own conjugal love against the backdrop of Christ's definitive love, journeying together towards the fullness of the kingdom. It's a beautiful concept that single people living their life faithfully to the teachings of the church are teaching us that ultimately living our conjugal love faithfully and fruitfully leads to the kingdom, where we will all then be living in perfect unity with Christ. So the Pope ends this chapter 4, and don't worry, I'm not going to spend as much time on chapter 5 as I did on chapter 4. He ends this chapter by talking about really the transformation of love. And he has a beautiful quote that I think every person who may not understand the richness of married love, and how not only young people can love, he's trying to get us to understand it all. And so he says this: in the course of every marriage, physical appearances change, but this hardly means that love and attraction need fade. We love the other person for who they are, not simply for their body. Although the body ages, it still expresses the personal identity that first won our heart. Even if others can no longer see the beauty of that identity, a spouse continues to see it with the eyes of love, and so his or her affection does not diminish. He or she reaffirms the decision to belong to the other and expresses that choice in faithful and loving closeness. The nobility of this decision, by its intensity and depth, give rise to a new kind of emotion as they fulfill their marital mission. For emotion caused by another human being as a person does not per se tend towards the conjugal act. It finds other sensible expressions. Indeed, love is a single reality, but with different dimensions. At different times, one or other dimension may emerge more clearly. It's a beautiful paragraph. That's why I read the whole thing. In a world that puts so much importance on beauty and visual and look, many people in married relationships don't feel their spouse could love them because of how they look. And the Pope is speaking to this deeper love, this depth of connectedness to the whole person, as we saw in Adam and Eve, although he doesn't bring them into it at this point, as we saw in Adam and Eve at the beginning, that they were naked without shame. They didn't see themselves as naked. They saw themselves as whole people who connected to each other. And finally, at the end, he reminds us that none of this, however, is possible without praying to the Holy Spirit for an outpouring of his grace, his supernatural strength, and his spiritual fire to confirm, direct, and transform our love in every new situation. So no matter who we are or where we are, we will be loving, and we really need that strength of the Holy Spirit to help us through. So I want to touch, Sarah, were there any questions regarding chapter 4 so far? Sarah may have herself muted. Let me just take a quick peek at the chat. Oh, where does romantic gestures fit in? That's a good one there. Let me just go up and see. There's a couple of here. So the first question I'm going to, I believe that a couple who marry have learned much from their parents, watching them resolve issues, but still there are times when the young couple break up. I think that the reason many young people just live together and do not get married is because they have given up on having a married, sorry, I don't have my glasses on, a marriage that lasts. They look at many examples, including their own parents who did not make it. There's some truth to that, although what's important in the whole sense of things is that we understand that a marriage of parents breaking up does not predict in any way whether or not children's marriages will break up, but we do learn how to love. We learn how to be a husband and wife. We learn how to be a mom or dad in our family relationships. And so unless we actively seek to do something different, it may be true that we end up breaking up because they broke up and we think that's the way. But in most cases, everyone, young people, older people, when they're struggling in their marriage, are looking for ways to mend and heal those rifts. And if the document is trying to teach us anything, it's that we as a church, because we believe in all of this piece of love and indissolubility and all of that, we need to find ways to reach out, to offer programs that support young couples and middle-aged couples and older couples, that we need to offer those kinds of supports that people need so that they can enter into the ideal love that we've been talking about tonight. So yes, there are challenges, and some that you've listed there are challenges, but not insurmountable. We can work within the confines of what we know from social science research to help. And where does romantic gestures fit in? I think they fit into the whole essence of passion. And passion is not just a sexual union. We sometimes think of that. He's talking about this passion of wanting to be together, of having someone do something, a romantic gesture, if you, as you've spoken there, that will make us feel loved and cared for, and feel there's a sense of gratitude for us being in their lives. And the interesting thing is, romantic gestures are different for everyone. For some people, someone holding the door, opening the door for them is a very romantic gesture. For someone else, it might be that they cook dinner, fold the laundry, put their arms around you and give you a kiss now and then. There's all different kinds of romantic gestures. The important thing is that most often women have desires in the romantic gesture department that they never share with their spouse. They want their spouse to pick it up by osmosis or just know what it is. And all the experts agree, we must speak. That's why Pope Francis is telling you to dialogue. We must tell people this is what would make me feel good and cared for, because most often people want you to feel that way. They just don't want or know what you want. And so a little piece on that. Again, understanding the reality versus the ideal, and how do we move towards the ideal. So the final chapter, which I'm going to have to cover fairly quickly, but that's okay, is that love is made fruitful. It makes sense. We've talked all about what love is. We've talked about that moving us in toward married and conjugal love, and out of a union together, we produce, of course, life. And so chapter 5 is really about bringing children into the world. And he starts off by writing this. I think it's a beautiful piece, that love always gives life. Conjugal love does not end with the couple. The couple, in giving themselves to one another, give not just themselves, but also the reality of children who are a living reflection of their love, a permanent sign of their conjugal unity, and the living and inseparable synthesis of their being a father and a mother. It's a beautiful piece. I think we don't often think about how our children continually reflect that back to us, and then eventually, if we're lucky enough, our grandchildren, and maybe even great-grandchildren. So children, he goes on to talk about quite a bit, matter, and he talks about how they should be treated and the fact that we really have to treat them well. And he goes on to say this: large families are a joy to the church. They are an expression of the fruitfulness of love. And at the same time, St. John Paul II rightfully explained that responsible parenthood does not mean unlimited procreation or a lack of awareness of what is involved in rearing children, but rather the empowerment of couples to use their inviolable liberty wisely and responsibly, taking into account social and demographic realities, as well as their own situation and legitimate desires. I love that he brings this point up, because sometimes in our church, I see us getting into well, they've got lots of children, they don't have too many, they can't be good Catholics, or they're the better Catholics, or however that goes. And in fact, as he says, every couple needs to discern economically, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, how many children can they bring into the world and do a good job of making that love fruitful for their children. And yes, some people will probably argue or say to me that, in fact, people often could have more. But the Pope is saying, remember way back at the beginning, that we're not called to judge. We're called to assist, if you will. And so we must accept the couple has the right to make that decision, as the church does. So then he talks about welcome a child, that children are a gift from God. I think most people would see that, even when they are unexpected or unwanted. He puts that point in there. And he says this: children, once born, begin to receive, along with nourishment and care, the spiritual gift of knowing with certainty that they are loved. This love is shown to them through the gift of their personal name, the sharing of language, looks of love, and the brightness of a smile. In this way, they learn that the beauty of human relationships touches our soul, seeks our freedom, accepts the differences of others, recognizes and respects them as a partner in dialogue. Such is love, and it contains the spark of God's love. From the beginning, why the family is known as the domestic church, because we are teaching. He speaks about the rights of children here, to be loved and to be cared for, and their needs that are must be met and should be met by parents. And he shares the need for mothers and fathers to be part of their children's lives and to bring very specific qualities and nurturing to their children. And that we should be joyful when we're expectant. Expectant parents shouldn't fear, they shouldn't worry, be apprehensive, because that takes their happiness away. They should live in joyful expectation of what's to come. And he reminds us that at times we have to expand our concept of fruitfulness. He writes, some couples are unable to have children. We know that this can be a cause of real suffering for them. At the same time, we know that marriage was not instituted solely for procreation of children. Even in cases where, despite the intense desire of the spouses, there are no children, marriage still retains its character of being a whole manner and communion of life, and preserves its value and indissolubility. So too, he said, motherhood is not a solely biological reality, but is expressed in diverse ways. This is very important, because in today's world, people are often condemning those who haven't had children, and in many cases, it's because they can't have children. That number is growing, especially in North America. Lots of studies going on. And then he talks about adoption and foster care, that they should be supported, that they are generous ways of being parents. And he says this: adopting a child is an act of love, offering the gift of a family to someone who has none. It's important to assist that legislation help facilitate the adoption process, above all, in the case of unwanted children, in order to prevent their abortion or abandonment. Further, he says the choice of adoption and foster care expresses a particular kind of fruitfulness in the marriage experience, not only in the case of infidelity. In the light of those situations where a child is desired at any cost as a right for one's self-fulfillment, adoption and foster care, correctly understood, manifest an important aspect of parenting and raising of children. He wants us to support it. He wants us to support those who do adopt and foster children, and to consider it ourselves as a solution for every child, so that no child is unwanted. And he goes on to talk about the importance of a mother and father, and that whole aspect. And then he brings in the final sort of perspective. He talks about the importance of brothers and sisters, both while growing up and as we age, He talks about the importance of respect and dignity for sons and daughters, honoring their parents. And he talks about the importance of including the family beyond the immediate family, aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends that will be supportive and bringing them into the family as part of the family union. And in this part, he talks about the elderly and families. And he says this, he first quotes from Psalm 71, verse 9, "Do not cast me off in the time of old age, forsake me not when my strength is spent." And he says this is the plea of the elderly who fear being forgotten and rejected. Just as God asks us to be his means of hearing the cry of the poor, so too he wants us to hear the cry of the elderly. This represents a challenge to families and communities, since the church cannot and does not want to conform to a mentality of impatience and much less of indifference and contempt towards old age. We must reawaken the collective sense of gratitude, of appreciation, of hospitality, which makes the elderly feel like a living part of the community. Our elderly are men and women, fathers and mothers, who come before us on our own road, in our own house, in our daily battle for a worthy life. Indeed, how would I like a church that challenges a throwaway culture by the overflowing joy of a new embrace between young and old? So he's very much, and he's written lots on this, on the elderly, of the importance of all of that. And then again, the smaller circle embracing the larger circle, but not forgetting those as they age and they need us. So the larger family he includes, by the way, that we cannot forget fathers-in-laws and mothers-in-law and all the relatives of the couple. One particular delicate aspect of love is learning not to view these relatives as somehow competitors, threats, or intruders, but the conjugal union demands respect for their traditions and customs, an effort to understand their language and to refrain from criticism, caring for them and cherishing them while maintaining the legitimate privacy and independence of the couple. So quite a challenge, and again, seeing where we're at. And so he talks again, reminding us, and the next piece is about this, educating of children, that parents have the most influence, that it's their right and duty, that no one should try to replace them, and we should challenge them not to be replaced, and to work with parents in our churches and in our communities to try to help people. So in essence, we're called to give back in love, and that involves so many things, as you're seeing on the screen there, and that it is our duty to work towards that love and to feeling able to give that love and being capable of it, because we are living in community, a community of family, a community of a church, a community of the wider community that we live in, a community of our nation, and a community of the world. And all those things interconnect to make life valuable for others. So what are the next steps? Well, the Pope is asking everyone to read the document. If you haven't read it, I'm going to send you the link to our Amoris Laetitia page. You can download it there. Some of you did send emails, and we mailed you the book out last week. I think the book is $15 if you want to order it from us. It's this one right here, Amoris Laetitia. You can read it online, as I say. Think about how to get the words of the beauty in this document and our teachings out to others. How can we get that out? What do we need to do? Because left in a book, it doesn't mean anything. It's only by helping people, as we said at the beginning, move towards living the ideal, that we actually support the teachings and the faith. And then what is your personal commitment to all of that, if any? And for some of you, it may just be prayer. Because prayer becomes an essential piece for so many people. So, and there is my contact information, which most of you have anyway, because we've been back and forth by email. But if you take a look at this presentation, once it's up online, you'll see it further. But you can email me or contact me about any of those things that you may have. So we're a little bit over tonight. I apologize for that. But tonight was giving us the love story, how to love and what it means to love. And hopefully, maybe reminding some of us that we may not be in the ideal yet of how we love, that we still have room for improvement, and that we need to work hard towards living that ideal love, because everyone will be better, those around us will be better, which then goes out to the community and to other people. So that's tonight. It's our last night for Amoris Laetitia. I remind you that we will now have a speaker that will pick sort of one piece off of each of out of the document, some concept out of the document, and expand on that further, but it won't be on Amoris Laetitia. It will be sort of a specialty talk in a particular area. So I will send that out to you, but you will have to register again if you want to partake in any of those talks. And I hope you will encourage others to take part in them and become engaged in hearing these speakers. We're hoping to do this to educate people and to help them live their lives of love more fully. So thank you all for coming on, and I hope that tonight was good for you, and we will hopefully see you on some of the other sessions. Okay, so take care, everybody. Good to see you all.
God bless you.
Thank you.
You